Hello, hi, welcome. It is another week. It's another episode of Unlapped. I'm Nicole Briscoe. Laurence Edmondson is also here. You know the rules. You know what to do. If you like us, if you're watching us, then obviously give us a like, leave us a 5-star review, and be sure to subscribe to ESPN for all of your F1 content now, preseason, in the season, after the season. We're always here for your F1 needs. Laurence, hi, I've missed you. How have you been this week?
It's been a good week. I've missed you too, but I'm also slightly missing the fact I'm not in Bahrain this week
Yeah.
because, of course, we're about to see cars on track, and our good colleague Nate Saunders is
Here.
flying as we speak, so couldn't join us for this podcast. But we'll land there tonight and get stuck into F1 testing tomorrow morning. So it's
We're going to get
exciting
all the
time.
inside scoop. We're going to get all the inside scoop from Bahrain. And we're going to get to that in a second because obviously, like, Bahrain is sort of like the official launch of the season. It's the first time that we really get a good idea of what to expect from the teams. However, I think like the biggest storyline right now is also like sad, sad. Okay, we talked about it last week. F175. It was the official launch of the season. Every team got to put out their livery, and we got to hear from most drivers. But one of the big things that came out of it was when Red Bull and Christian Horner and Max Verstappen were near the stage, there was some booing. And all we have heard about since then is Red Bull crying about the fact that they were booed. I find it annoying and completely unself-aware. What do you think?
Well, we haven't heard directly from Red Bull yet. Be interested to see what Christian Horner says because
Yeah.
he'll have to speak this week in Bahrain and see exactly what he feels about it. I suspect he'll take your advice there and brush it off and pretend it wasn't a big issue. But I think internally, Red Bull have been a little bit upset about this because they went to the O2, they agreed to do this collective launch of all the other teams, something that Formula One had really wanted all the teams to buy into. And then they get there and they're the villain. And perhaps this should have been expected. It was a launch in London, home of Lewis Hamilton. And of course, people have long memories. They still remember 2021. And there's also a few other things that have happened around Red Bull in recent years, particularly the domination of the sport, that I
Right.
think has kind of painted them a little bit as the bad guys. And the thing is, if you're going to hold an event like that, and the great thing about this event and why we were told it's going to be so brilliant, and I think it was actually quite brilliant, is because it was in front of all these people. And if you put it in front of the people, then you're going to have those
Fans,
people
not
react.
media people, not industry insiders. This was an event that was for the fans. So yes,
Exactly.
had a response.
And the FIA, who also got booed, actually got a much bigger boo than Christian Horner and Max Verstappen. I'd say Max Verstappen, because I was there in the arena, he got a mix of a bit of booing, but a lot of cheering as well. So it was kind of a mixed response. I feel like, it wasn't really full on booing like he's actually had on the podium at times at certain races in the past as well. Christian Horner did get quite a big boo, but yeah, the biggest one was when the FIA's logo flashed up on this giant screen in the middle of the stage. And yeah, they got a big response, and they have criticized the tribalist nature of the fans at this event. And I just feel like, I mean, if you're getting booed, you're not going to make it any better by turning around to the people booing you and saying you're tribalist and you can't turn up at these events and express your opinion.
I just
So
I don't understand that mentality. And maybe it's the difference between being an American versus the UK culture. But then I think about like soccer in England and how like passionate those fans are. Like I kind of just don't get it because like let's just take US sports and the best way to draw a comparison is if you look at the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL, if you look at Tom Brady, look at the Patriots, if you look at the Bulls back in the 90s, when a team is doing the kind of thing that Red Bull has been doing to the sport the last 3 years, dominating and winning, you kind of become the enemy because there's this idea when you're a fan that you can't enjoy the greatness when it's happening. Now, like in hindsight, we'll look back and be like, Max Verstappen was great. The Chiefs were a dynasty. But in the moment, we have to hate on the success. And a lot of that is driven by passionate fans. Um, if I'm the FIA, if I am like a Red Bull, I want my fans to be passionate, but also like passion in a good way is just as effective, as passionate in a bad way. And I don't understand why it just can't be embraced.
Exactly. And there's a good example from soccer, our football in the United Kingdom,
Right.
around David Beckham, who I think is known around the world. In 1998, he got sent off in an England football match at the World Cup, and it basically lost England that match against Argentina. The following season, every ground he turned up to, every away game he was at,
He
he
was
got booed
booed.
endlessly, endlessly. But here's an example of how you can turn it around, because David Beckham was such a superstar, was so brilliant. His brilliance, I think, eventually got recognised. He went back to following World Cups and played brilliantly, put a huge amount of effort in on the pitch. And you know what? Fans forgave him. So this is the other thing. Like, if you've got a problem with it, perhaps look at yourself. How about how you're going about, the sport and how
Stop
you're
crying about it.
presenting yourself, how competitive you are. I mean, obviously all the teams want to win, but I think Red Bull are about to face a season where they're not going to dominate. And look at how you can build on that and build a better reputation within the sport. But yeah, to criticize it, it just doesn't come across very well. I think the other quote that really kicked this off since the event was Max's dad, Jos Verstappen, who
Right.
always speaks his mind. And he said that Max won't turn up again if it's in London and there's another launch event. And
Fine. I'm cool with them moving this all around the world because it was a cool event. And like, fine, fine. Let's do it
it,
someplace else. And guess what? You
exactly.
continue to do the same thing you've been doing, you're going to get booed there too.
That's it. That's it. So, and also, I'm always a little bit careful when Jos speaks on Max's behalf, although Max and Jos are very tight. So I'm sure whatever Jos said, Max is actually thinking. But yeah, I completely agree. Take it to Amsterdam next year if you want to,
Right.
and do it on Max's home turf and see how everything will be spun round. So
Right.
yeah, I think this is it's an interesting reaction, but I think, like I said, if F1 really wants to bring itself to the people, it really wants to connect with all these fans that have recently got into the sport, it's got to
Mhm.
accept that there's going to be ups and downs, boos and cheers, and that's what makes it fun.
I do think sometimes there is a disconnect between like the FIA and Formula One
That's
and
true.
the ownership group in Liberty Media, because Liberty has come aboard and they have sold the sport in a way that it wasn't sold before. And so, as much as the drivers and the teams have seemingly embraced sort of the marketing of the sport, there are times like this where you really do see the old school, new school, and like the disconnect between the two. I also think like there's gamesmanship to this, like the relation, because we heard from Toto Wolff this week too, like the Christian Horner Toto Wolff thing is that it's a thing, and some of it is like made for TV, and like their relationship, it's better for all of us. It's more entertaining for all of us when they're not BFFs and they're not hugging it out. Like it's like let them stir the pot, and I do think we saw a little bit of that this week from Toto.
Yeah, I think Toto, I mean, to be fair, again, he was asked about it and gave an opinion on it and basically said, it is what it is. Let the fans be the fans that they are and let them express their opinions the way they do. He confirmed that he didn't boo Christian Horner. I mean, I could imagine Toto there booing away, but
But
apparently
I
he
also would
said,
imagine him doing it like in an entertaining way, like
exactly.
also booing right in front of like Christian Horner's face kind of thing, you know?
Exactly. But he said, well, I didn't need to because there were 15,000 people there doing it anyway. So I didn't need to get involved, which I thought was quite a stinging remark as well. But look, again, this is what we love, isn't it? We love these heroes and villains. And for each F1 fan, you know, it will be Horner who's the villain, or for another one, it might be Toto Wolff who's the villain. Everyone has their opinion on it, and everywhere you go around the world, and that's what's so great about the sport is it does go to all these places around the world. You'll see completely different types of fandom. We'll go be in Japan at the third race of the season, and there the fans are hugely enthusiastic for everyone from your team principals and your drivers right down to individual mechanics and engineers. They will pick out because they love the sport so deeply and they just want to support. But then you'll go to other places like the United States is a great example where fans will say what they think, and they'll have opinions about who they like and who they don't like. And I think that's just all part of what makes this sport so brilliant. The fact that it has this global support and that global support can say what they think.
Again, it's passion, and passion is not a bad thing. It just may not mean the same thing from one fan to the next. I'm sure that will be talked about a little bit this week. But as we mentioned, like Nate isn't joining us today because he is literally on a plane heading to Bahrain for the beginning of preseason testing, which is really like our first chance. Like we think we know the potential for this season, but this is really the first opportunity where we get to see the cars on the track. We get to see how drivers look. We get to see the work that the teams have put in the off season. Um, if we just start there, like give me the top three storylines, the top three things that we need to be looking out for.
Well, I think first of all, you're going to be trying to gauge whether it is as close as we're all hoping it is. And
Yeah.
you've got four teams that we are really hoping will be within a fraction of a second of each other. And that's McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, and Mercedes. So we should get a little inkling as to whether all that hope that we're going to have one of the most competitive seasons in memory is really going to happen. And I think the real indicator there will be making sure that none of those four teams are struggling. So, they have the car on track. They're not facing reliability issues. They're able to put in consistent lap times, and then digging a little bit deeper just to make sure those lap times are roughly in the right area. Lap times in testing can be hugely misleading. All you need to do is put soft tires and low fuel in the car, and you'll set a blinding lap time that everyone will think, oh my God, how's anyone done that? Well, a lot of it is down to the detail of what's actually going on with the car on any single run, and therefore comparisons are very difficult. But the more you look into it, especially when teams start to simulate races, like they'll actually do a simulation of an entire race, and then you can start to actually compare times and see where they are. I think the other big thing within that everyone's going to be looking at, of course, as we have been since
Let me get
January 1st,
Charles and Lewis.
Charles and Lewis, especially Lewis. And I think there'll be a lot of interest in comparing their lap times. One thing about testing preseason, as the way it is, as it is at the moment, has been for a number of years now, there's only one car for the two drivers to share. So they can't be on track at the same time. And that in itself means that their lap times aren't going to be much use comparing them, because it's going to be very cold in the evenings. At the moment, I think it's as low as about 12 degrees
Yeah.
centigrade.
Cool.
Sorry, I don't know the Fahrenheit, but that is quite cold. And in the day, it's a desert, so it's going to get a lot hotter. And so if you've got Charles in the car setting his lap times in the morning and Lewis in the evening, you're not going to have like for like conditions. So I think getting those comparisons is not going to be particularly useful, but people will inevitably read into them and say, oh my God, Lewis is 2/10 faster, or oh my God, Charles is half a second faster. But I think the really interesting thing is see how Lewis adapts to the team, whether, again, he gets the reliability he needs to spend time in the car, whether he's struggling with lockups consistently, whether, he's having issues with getting the car turned in, stuff like that. All the issues that he had with Mercedes, whether they then transfer over to Ferrari. And from looking at the car on track, we'll get a bit of an indication from that. And I think also Lewis is a driver who wears his heart on his sleeve. So when things aren't going very well, it's usually quite
You
easy to
go.
tell. He hasn't been the most enthusiastic about his recent Mercedes in preseason testing, and that kind of resulted in some pretty lackluster seasons. So yeah, if he's super excited and pumped the way he has been so far at Ferrari, if that continues into testing, I think that would be a key indicator that he's got what he needs.
Okay, so I asked for three. That was two. I know they were long, but like, what's the third one? Really putting
So
you on the spot.
a third one I think that would be really interesting throughout the start of the season is how the rookies get on. So, you've got Kimi Antonelli in at the Mercedes. I think he's the most high profile. But then, as we talked about in the last podcast, there's Jack Doohan, who, potentially has just a handful of races to prove himself, because Franco Colapinto, who our listeners will remember raced at Williams last year, he's waiting in the wings at Alpine now to take Doohan's place if Doohan slips up. And again, this is such a short period of time for a rookie to get acclimatized to a new car, to Formula One, really, because as I said, 3 days of testing, but only one car, which means each driver will get maximum 1.5 days, which works out to about 12 hours. Now, when you remove all the time that is spent either fixing the car or changing setups or, changing various different little details on the car, that time can slip away very quickly. And so for those rookies to get up to speed quickly, not make a mistake, not stick it in the barrier, that will be huge, because I think early in this season, with these kind of 5 rookies, 6 if you include Liam Lawson. I don't really include him as a rookie, but 5 rookies on the grid, then you could have a lot of mistakes, a lot of slip ups, and that creates a lot of opportunities for other people to benefit. So seeing how they bed themselves into their teams would be very interesting as well.
By the way, 12 degrees Celsius is like 53, 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Thank you, Google. Um, like I personally think we're going to walk out of these next 3 days, and the biggest storyline is going to be that Lewis Charles comparison, because someone is going to do the work to dive into the run plans and figure it out. And you have a really good point. Like these teams go into testing with a program, and they have run plans, and it's, if you're just looking at immediate lap times, if you don't know what the team is working on, it can be very misleading. But someone's going to go in, and probably Nate is going to put the effort into it. So like if there is a big gap, let's just live in that world for a second. If there is a big gap, or a big enough gap that it's noticeable, like how much can you even read into that, given the limited time and the fact that we really don't know what they're looking at?
Yeah, so I think if you see a big gap in the times at the end of the first day, I think most teams are going to share the car over the first day. Some teams will just put one driver in and then swap it. But even if you see a big gap as the times start to come through and you can compare them, first thing to look at is a tire compound, because if one driver is on what we call the C5, a relatively soft compound, there's actually a C6 now, but none team's going to use it. And then the other one is on a C2, which is a much harder compound. The soft compound offers way more lap time,
Yeah.
way more lap time. So things like that will be dead giveaways as to whether that big gap is actually anything to get interested about. Now, let's say they're on the same compound. Let's say they're both on the C4 or the C3, a fairly stable compound around Bahrain. Then you've got to start to look at, well, what were they doing during that time on track? Were they
Around
spending,
that.
yeah, were they spending 20 laps in one go out on track? Because that indicates that you're going to need a pretty heavy fuel load to get yourself around those 20 laps. Or were they out for 3 or 4 laps and setting a quick time? The other thing that's really important for the teams is actually not so much lap time. You'd think they'd want to know the absolute fastest lap that car can do around Bahrain, right? That seems like a logical thing that a Formula One team would want to get at the end of the week, but actually they don't, because that's not particularly useful. Because even when F1 goes back to Bahrain for the fourth round of the season, the conditions are going to be completely different. They'll know more about the cars. The cars will have evolved slightly. So it's not really useful to do that. What is useful is to do what's called scanning, which is basically changing the setup bit by bit by bit, whether it's the ride height going up and down, whether it's wing levels going up and down, whether it's, changing tire pressures to work within those different things that are changing, and scanning basically the car's setup potential and what you're getting out of that. And so that when you do get to a circuit and you think, actually, we probably need to raise the ride height, you know what you're doing when you raise the ride height. You know what to expect. Because the thing to remember at this stage, all these cars, their performance has only existed in simulations. It's not really existed on track yet. A few of them have done a few filming days here and there, but not with the proper tires and not enough time to really get stuck in. So all of that performance that they think they have at this stage, and some teams will be very excited about the new parts they're bringing to the car, but they don't know yet whether that actually translates into real world performance. And when you get a car on a track and the tires are overheating, or the driver's uncomfortable with the way the car is turning in to a corner and they don't have the confidence, all of that potential lap time can just slip away. And so that's what the teams are really looking for. And it may be the case that, let's say, in our kind of theoretical example, Lewis Hamilton set his time in the morning when Ferrari were really still struggling with mid-corner understeer. They found a solution because of Lewis's work, applied it for Charles Leclerc in the afternoon.
And then
He
he
reaps
takes
the
advantage.
rewards and goes half a second faster on the same tire compound on a similar run. Even that can be misleading. So that's why, I mean, as much as I'd like to say, yes, you can get stuck into it and fully understand it, you'll hear again and again and again this week. And it's really frustrating for F1 fans and media at this stage that we're not going to know anything until the cars go out in qualifying in Australia.
It
And
gives us an
that is kind of true.
indication. It's like it gives us like it's like the appetizer kind of thing. It gives us an indication. And it also, like I was talking to Gunther Steiner earlier, he was like, look, if a team shows up and they're just not taking advantage of the time on track, then that's an indication that something is wrong. They're not prepared, that sort of thing. So you can read into all of these little things, but it is not a complete picture of what to expect come the season.
That's absolutely right. You can definitely tell the teams that are struggling much better than you can tell the teams that are excelling because, yeah, the car won't be out on track. Or when it is, the car, will be constantly locking up into the same corners. The drivers will be facing the same issues over and over again. And then, like I said, there's a few drivers and less team principals. Maybe Gunter was one who would occasionally do it. They will give away a bit of information when we talk to them afterwards. So that's Nate's job on the ground to get talking to the
Well, that
drivers as much as possible, put the questions in there and understand the feedback that's coming back. Because sometimes, you can learn quite quickly that a driver's not happy, and that can indicate a much bigger problem that may not come across in the times at all.
I think we learned Lewis Hamilton was very unhappy a couple of years ago with the porpoising issues. Like we learned that almost immediately, in part
Yeah,
because
sure.
of what you said. That is a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve and he doesn't really hide it. But it sort of leads to like the next sort of thing because you said it when we were talking before we officially started. One of the cool things about testing is like, yeah, you get to see the cars on the track, but some of the most interesting things to see and watch and do are those behind the scenes like conversations. This time of year, why are those things almost as important as what we're actually seeing like on the circuit?
Yeah, I think one, it's just nice for everyone to catch up. It's a long winter in Formula One, and so everyone, I think, when you get back to testing, they have a bit more time as well. It's not like a race schedule where, you've got practice in 20 minutes. So sorry, I got to cut this coffee short and go, make sure that everything's in place. Which is what will happen over race weekend. Whereas at testing, people are a bit more laid back. They usually have a bit more time, and I think also teams are in a kind of information gathering mindset as well because they don't really know what's going on with other teams as well. They don't know each other's fuel loads. They have kind of ways of guessing, and they can look at GPS data and learn a lot from that, which is something that we don't have as the media. And they have basic knowledge because engineers move around from teams, how different teams approach testing, and therefore read a bit more into the times. But they're also looking for a bit of information. So there's a lot of information trading that goes on. Some of it through the media, I guess a lot of it just through the teams themselves. But there's a lot of information trading that goes on because everyone's trying to build up this picture. Because even though having all that information, it's not really going to change what happens in Australia. If you've got a car that's really struggling in Bahrain, you've got a very short amount of time to get anything fixed for Australia. But still, everyone wants to know because at this time of the year, everyone's super excited. So I think there is a little bit more willingness to kind of, to say and to spot stuff and to talk about stuff. And yeah, because the times can be so easily masked by a heavy fuel load. I mean, just to give you an example, 10 kilos of fuel, a full tank is 110 kilos. So about a tenth of that is, if you put that in the car, that's 0.3 seconds extra lap time per lap that you're going to add onto your lap time. So just by removing, 30 kilos of fuel from the car, all of a sudden you're going to find about a second of lap time. So stuff
Your
like that can
that could
easily
very
mask it.
easily be your gap.
Yeah, exactly. And so all of a sudden those times that are coming up, they just don't really mean as much unless you can really get the details. So that's what everyone's trying to find out off each other. And I think that's why those conversations are so useful at this stage of the year for trying to find out who's fast and who's
But
not.
like, I mean, everything in Formula One is expensive and like there's a lot of travel. Most of these teams are based in the UK. Like they can go about there's a track there. Yet they choose to do preseason testing and Bahrain. Like, why?
So Bahrain has been the season opener for the last few years, and therefore to go and do the test there and just stay there made a lot of sense.
That made
Now,
sense.
now this year, of course, it's not. It's in Australia, but going to Australia to go testing also doesn't make a lot of sense.
No.
So it is a kind of halfway house, and a lot of the freight, not the people, but the freight will just continue onwards from Bahrain to Australia. Now the cars, I think, will come back because there'll be work to do on them, and there'll be bits and pieces, that need changing and fixing up and whatever. But that's kind of the reason. The other reason is that the weather right now in the UK, not great for testing a Formula One car. Very cold, a lot of rain. And if you want to try and really understand what your car's doing, you need consistent conditions throughout the 3 days. Now, Bahrain, like I said, because at the moment it seems actually like it's quite cold there, you're not
Right.
really going to get that. They're going to have cold mornings, warmer middle of the day, and then colder evenings. But it's still more consistent than you'd find anywhere in Europe. We used to do a lot of testing in Spain, which a little bit warmer than the UK, certainly sunnier than the UK. And there has been talk about going there again because it saves a bit of cost. It's not as far to go. And also, if teams want to bring stuff during the test, it's a lot closer. So it's a lot easier to get it over there. It's a lot cheaper to get it over there. So I wouldn't be surprised next year when we're expecting to see more than 3 days of testing because we've got brand new engines, completely new car designs.
Right.
That's going to need a little bit more than 3 days to get right. I wouldn't be surprised if we do a little bit more in Spain and then maybe a Bahrain test as well, and then onto the race in Bahrain next year. But that's to be confirmed. But yeah, I mean, that's essentially why we've ended up in Bahrain. Bahrain loves F1. You know, it's a country that's built a lot of its identity in recent
Yeah.
years around F1 since it became the first country in the Middle East to host a race. So I think all of it kind of comes together, and it's easy for F1 to go testing there.
I do think one of the other storylines that could come out in the next couple of days, it's a storyline that developed late last season when the FIA was like, no, you can't swear. Don't swear anymore. Not on the radio, not in press conferences. And one of the bigger things that's happened recently is rally drivers have come out and said, you can't use against us what we say in the heat of the moment. And that's one of the things that has always struck me as like interesting, I think, about what the FIA is saying. Like, I understand that you want your drivers to be ambassadors. I understand that when your drivers are in, like, say, a press conference, you want them to be the best versions of yourselves, right? Okay, fine. But I also think from like a fan perspective and a media perspective, I appreciate authenticity. Um, I don't want a driver to go up into a press conference and be a soundbite. I want to get the real them. How do you really feel about the situation that you've been put in? And if shit comes out of their mouth, fine. I don't, it doesn't bother me. It doesn't offend me because it seems real. And also, like, Formula One or motorsports in general is a sport where we have access to drivers in the heat of the moment. We have access to them while they are literally competing. We don't get that in any other sport. And everything is happening obviously quickly. Like, I just don't understand why the FIA has absolutely dug their heels in on this. And I like the idea that other drivers and other series are coming out and saying, this is wrong. So, how much play is that going to get in the next couple of days?
I think a huge amount. And it goes down, it's a much deeper issue, I think, between Formula One, the FIA, the drivers, the teams, and a bit of an uneasy relationship there, which has been the case since Mohammed Ben Sulayem came in as FIA president. And this is really the directive that's come down from him. Of course, anyone with memory that goes back a couple of years, remember there was the jewelry ban
Yeah.
of the F1 drivers wearing jewelry, having to wear the right underwear. And a lot of drivers are like, really? You're focusing on these details?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there's a certain logic to it, but is this really the biggest issue that our sport faces? And so by bringing in these fines now, it's a very structured system for the fines for Formula One drivers if they are considered to have partaken in misconduct, which can be swearing. So the first instance, it's a €40,000 fine. The second
Which is
one is
insane.
which is it's a lot of, I
I
mean,
realize the money
$40,000.
that is in Formula One for the drivers and whatever, but like, if you scare me, I'm going to say the S word kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
so it's insane to me that you're just going to take 40,000 pounds for a slip up. Like, it's the
Yeah.
first offense.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, what should be said is that it seems the way the FIA is going to approach this, although it's not actually written out in the rules, is that the the in-car radio, so the stuff that we hear during a broadcast, will not count. So they'll still be able to swear in that, partly because F1 bleeps most of it that goes
Yeah.
out to the public, and secondly, that's kind of on F1. You know, if F1 wants to broadcast that,
Mhm.
it's a conversation that's happening in the car between engineer and driver. They need to express themselves in whatever way they can as they're going within inches of walls at 200 miles per hour.
Right,
Um,
because that is the thing that I think most people don't understand. It's not that the drivers and the teams are putting out that is an F1 sort of like regulated.
yeah,
They pick the camera shots, they pick the sound we hear. on the global feed. So yes, it is on F1. If you want to play that sound in which a driver or an engineer is swearing, that is on you.
Yeah. So it seems like the FIA are going to turn a blind eye to that. They're going to be okay. But any swearing in a press conference, which of course is what happened at Singapore last year with Max Verstappen, and he ended up doing a community service punishment in Rwanda at the end of the year. That's now going to come with one of those €40,000 fines for the first instance. Second instance, that's doubled, €80,000, which is, yeah, I mean, about $82,000, and a suspended 1 month ban, because if there's a third offence, it's €120,000 fine, again, probably about $125,000, and a 1 month suspension from competition. So drivers, this could decide a championship if a driver
Right.
swears 3 times in a press conference. Now, I kind of look at this two ways. One, I think this is a bit absurd, and the reason it's become an issue amongst rally drivers is because Adrian Fourmeau did swear in a post. I think he basically got interviewed immediately after getting out of the car, or while he was still in the car, and he said he'd effed up, and therefore that was
Right.
given a fine. But you can see that happening quite easily to a driver once. Now, I think if you're on the brink of a 1 month ban, then yeah, you probably will watch what you're saying. So this will probably work, but it just does seem like the wrong thing to be focusing on. The other
Seems
thing I
like
should say is that those fines and bans are within a 2 year period as well. So it's not just one season, that's over 2 years. So 2 seasons.
it also just seems like the jewelry ban, it's like a watering down of your stars. Like this sport, like all sports, thrives on your superstars. And you would think after the success of Drive to Survive, in which not just the front of the field was showcased, in which stars were born across the entire field, that we learned drivers' personalities. We learned about drivers that maybe through that show, unless you were a diehard Formula One fan, you wouldn't have been paying attention to week in and week out. And then suddenly, because these drivers started to get more attention and a little bit more focus, like we learned about them, we learned their personalities. And it just feels like what some of these rules are doing is trying to take the things that fans and media members alike appreciate about the drivers, and you're taking it away from them. You're taking away their identity. Like I remember the day that the jewelry ban came out, I happened to be interviewing, this is in Miami, I happened to be interviewing Lewis Hamilton. And I was like, dude, why are you here with 4 watches, 72 chains? Like it was all of it. And like, in the moment, but like that's part of what makes him him, his fashion, how he presents himself. If somebody gets up in the heat of the moment and is just like, God, oh, whatever, like I appreciate passion, I appreciate that, and I don't want anyone to water it down. Now I understand, like, if someone is just like f this, f that, f this, f this, okay, fine, but there has to be some sort of like middle ground. And I guess my next question is like, what's a swear word? Is there an actual list out there of approved words? Because if I come out there and I go, what the hell? Is hell a swear word? Because for some people, that might be. So where's the line? It's just like an incredibly slippery, ugly slope that I want no part of.
Yeah, it really is. And it's going to come down to the stewards to decide on that kind of thing. I imagine things like hell will just be allowed to let go. But yeah, it's going to come down to the stewards. And the stewards actually don't have to enforce these fines. So if they think that, well, actually this has been taken out of context, or in reality it's not such a big deal, they don't have to impose the fine. They don't have to give, the first warning of 3 and all that kind of stuff. But I completely agree with your point. I mean, the reason Drive to Survive was so successful was because it was rawness. It was the raw characters there. I mean, to give a little bit away about what's coming up on this podcast, we got Gunther Steiner coming up as an interview. I
Yeah.
believe he did it today. I mean, his whole personality
Is the
was
F word
based
every
around
other word?
exactly. It was based around the way he said the F word. And it's brilliant. And you talk to Gunther, I mean, I don't know what he was like in your interview. I think with interviews, he
I
does
don't think
try
he swore once,
yeah,
actually.
no. I mean, and also I think when he's on behalf of a brand, which increasingly he is now. He's kind of working as a personality within the sport. He's a little bit careful about what he says. But if you talk to him, with the cameras off and all that kind of stuff, that's who he is. That is Gunter. And also, a very important point that I think is, that we should stress is that for Gunter and for the vast majority of the drivers in Formula One, it's their second language. And so, I think these words don't have the same meaning in a second language. It doesn't mean the same thing when you say, the F word or, any other word as it is in your own language. And so, I think that's a thing that needs to be taken into account, not least because a number of young drivers I've talked to over the years, guys coming through, they spent a lot of time around mechanics. And anyone who spent a lot of time around mechanics in motorsport will know they swear a huge amount and they'll use the most brilliant, colourful language, which is absolutely hilarious in most everyday circumstances. And
My
so, yeah,
husband
and
tells
so
a
young
story.
drivers latch onto this.
Yeah,
They'll use it as well because everyone laughs in the garage and they do the same, and they think it's funny. And so, I think all of this needs to be taken into context, and it's not really. And it's weird that we're talking about this at the start of a Formula One
I
season,
know.
and the only people who are responsible for it really is the FIA, and particularly the FIA president, who, funnily enough,
They
to
got
go back
booed.
to our first conversation, were booed at the
Right.
O2.
It's funny about the mechanics swearing. My husband tells a story because he moved to Italy. He's obviously involved in motorsports. My husband was. And he moved to Italy when he was like, I don't even remember how old, like very 15. And he's Australian. So he was moving to Italy and speaking a second language. And the mechanics thought it was hilarious to teach them
Yeah,
like all of the bad things to say, and
exactly.
work it into conversation like it was normal. And he went to my husband didn't have a conversation. They're like, what are you learning? Because this is not right. And the mechanics thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
That's just how they are. Um, so I want to get to a couple of headlines this week. One of them is actually about a mechanic. We'll get to that in a second. But Carlos Sainz, obviously a new team this year, but he's also the new director of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, filling that role that was vacated by Sebastian Vettel. I feel like every once in a while we get little bits and pieces about what that organization is. Like for those fans who don't know what the Drivers Association is, like what is it and how will signs be used?
Yeah, it's essentially a collective voice for all the drivers on the grid. And when I first started in the sport, not all drivers were signed up to it. And it's quite interesting to learn the drivers that weren't. Kimi Raikkonen didn't sign up to it for a very long time. But the idea is that, they can have a collective voice and therefore play a bigger part in conversations like the swearing conversation or new regulations coming in. They can talk
Is that
together
track safe?
yeah, exactly. I mean, safety is the initial reason that it was set up and is a very important, important reason for it. And so inevitably you need everyone to be on board, so they all meet together and talk. But really, you want one or two people kind of getting the message across to either the FIA or Formula One or team principals or whatever. And so that's why it's quite important to have directors who are well trusted within the sport, have a lot of contacts within the sport, usually quite senior within the sport. So Carlos Sainz joins George Russell in that
Yeah.
role. And I think, probably rightly so. I mean, as much as Sebastian Vettel is still a central figure in motorsport. And when he turns up in the paddock, you see everyone wanting to talk to him. All the drivers want to talk to him. Most team members will want to go and have a chat with him. He's not in Formula One anymore. So I think it's the right time that Carlos Sainz would take that step. And I think he's the right guy to do it as well. He's
Hi.
very sound, very logical. If we as the media, we often want people who are going to speak eloquently and actually thoughtfully about certain issues within the sport. Again, safety is so often one. And Carlos Sainz is one of those guys you go to for a quote because he's got the experience and also he's just really good at expressing his views and he's not too radical one way or the other. He's well liked within the group of drivers. So guys like Carlos and then George is the other example. They are very important spokespeople basically for the drivers.
How do they work together? Like in this situation, how would George and Carlos work together?
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, I'm not entirely sure. I think George will be relieved because so often, because he was the only active director there, so often the media would point questions at George when there was something to do with safety or something to do
Yeah.
with swearing, something where we wanted the GPDA view, those questions would all go to George. Now that will be split. So I think George will be quite thankful for that. As much as he's very good at answering those, I think it does get a bit tedious when you become almost like the sole spokesperson for all the drivers. Alex Wirtz, who's a former driver, is the chairman of the GPDA. And I think he does a lot of work behind the scenes to just organize things and make sure that the message really is getting through to the right people, the right power brokers within the sport. Whereas I think, yeah, with Carlos and George now, it will be up to them to kind of get that message across to us guys in the media. They have a lot of, contact time with us in the media and therefore out to the wider public. But, they will be the people that will also be going around to the other drivers, canvassing opinions, making sure that, everyone is heard and perhaps, giving a bit of advice to the younger guys as well, starting out in their career. I mean, I don't think that's really the role of the GPDA, but you can imagine both of those drivers willing to do that if need be.
Yeah, it's a massive sign of respect, obviously. And I have always, like every interaction I've ever had with Sainz, he's always been really thoughtful and measured in his response, whether you're talking to him about the influence his dad has had on his career or if he likes the schedule in Las Vegas. Like, he's just thoughtful and measured. And I like the way he has approached all of that. So I think it'll be a good thing. And that is how we bring things to an end for today, because obviously next week, a lot of storylines to talk about. We'll have all the Bahrain testing. We'll drag Nate along for the ride for that one. You have a good week. Talk to you in a few days. Let's all enjoy testing. Thank you for watching and listening. Remember, leave us a comment, hit that like button, hit us up with a 5-star review, subscribe to ESPN for all your F1 content, and we will see you next week.